Great. So, well, thank you for all coming in today. Boy, that was an interesting video. I didn't realise my head was as shiny as that. I wish my car was as shiny as that, but it isn't. Okay, so my name's Andy Brown. I'm going to be, I work for a German company called SQS, but we've recently been bought out by a French company called AS Systems. And I seriously think we are going to have to change our name at some stage. So, what I do, or part of what I do is I look at what it is about our thought processes that will either cause us to create defects, fail to spot defects, or cause other problems within the software development process. And what I'd like to talk about is how we can look at a computer screen. There can be a defect which is clearly visible on there, but for some reason we fail to spot it there. So, and sometimes it's called inattentional blindness. So I'll go through this. So just a reminder, for questions there's the Slido. I will give a warning that during this there will be some flashing images. So if flashing images do cause you a problem, there'll be a warning immediately beforehand so you can look away from the screen at that time. Okay, so let's move through. So we'll look at a short video clip now where we'll count up some basketball passes. You may have seen something similar at some stage in your recent past. Okay, so we'll go through this.
This is a test of selective attention. Count how many times the players wearing white pass the basketball. How many passes did you count? The correct answer is 15 passes. But did you see the gorilla?
Of course you saw it. Okay, so I suspect that you may have seen something similar recently. Okay, what I am really interested in is the question why we failed to spot that gorilla there. Okay, so if you are interested in this work here was done by Simons and Chabris. If you are interested in this, they brought out quite an interesting book on the subject there, The Invisible Gorilla. And if you have an interest in inattentional blindness, this is a good place to start. So, I'm interested in spotting the unexpected, and as testers, that's also something that's of relevance to yourselves there. So, spotting things that we're not expecting there. It's not only testing though, so if you think of airport security, immigration officers, very often there are a number of professions where there is a very rare event, but it's very important to try and catch it there. So very infrequent but unexpected events that have high relevance. So the question that we want to ask is how good are we at spotting these events? So before anybody here gets too despondent if they failed to spot the gorilla the first time, or in fact the whole audience here, before you start feeling too smug about spotting it the second time, there's perhaps 3 questions we want to ask. And it's basically, how big is this problem? The second is, what is it that we're actually trying to do when we're trying to spot or fail to spot that gorilla? And the third question is spotting failing to spot that gorilla, is it necessarily a bad thing? Or is it simply a trade-off between two or more things there? So, first question there, how big is the problem? So, every second of your waking life, you will receive about 10 million bits of information, sensory information, primarily from your visual, but also from your audio, from touch, from smell, from taste there. So 10 million bits of information. But how many bits of information can you consciously process? It's typically about 8 to 40 bits per second. So you have to get down from 10 million to 8 to 40. And the size of those two squares there is not proportional. The smaller square would have to be 1,000 times smaller than it is there to be a representative. So we have to filter out a massive amount of information. And then the next second, we have to do that exactly again, all in real time. So this is a really difficult problem. And so for anybody that was listening to anything about the artificial intelligence equaling humans by 2030, I think that those people are sort of underestimating some of the problems they've got there. So a question would be, why do we have perception and attention at all? And that's a useful question there, because you could develop an organism that doesn't have anything at all like that, and it could still survive. So if you ask the psychologists, and particularly if you ask evolutionary psychologists, what they would say is we have perception in order to take action, or in order to react favourably with our environments there, or to solve a problem that's relevant to our evolutionary fitness. And that's an important point, because different species and different people will have different problems. So if we look at this animal here, so this is a dik-dik, it's a type of antelope there, and it feeds on grass. It tends to be preyed on by by predators, so typically cats, large cats and dogs, things like that. So the evolutionary problem one of the big evolutionary problems it's trying to solve with its vision is predator avoidance. So if you look at the eyes on that dik-dik there, you'll see that they're on either side of the head there. And they've got a very wide range of vision. So they're able to detect from a very wide range of angles a predator creeping up on it. So that's how it tries to solve its problem there, which is predator avoidance. If we look at something else, such as a lion or a tiger, that's got a different problem that it's trying to solve. It's now not trying to engage in predator avoidance. It is the predator. There's nothing else that eats this. So they don't need this wide range of vision. So they have a different set of problems. So here they have to acquire, chase, subdue prey there. So they have to do some other things, such as gauge distance, gauge motion very accurately, and work out an intercept path. So different set of problems. Also, within our problems there, when we're looking at it, there's actually several distinct problems that are going to come in there. And so, for example, if we look at an object, the first thing is we'd have to work out, perhaps for the dik-dik, is this object a predator? So, as well as just visually seeing something, we're going to have to do some object classification of some sort there. We're also going to do, is that predator, is it coming towards me? In which case, then we're going to have to do some, we're going to have to work out some motion as well. So there's lots and lots of problems that are associated with vision and perception far beyond what we immediately think there. And also, there's a whole load of problems that we don't even think about. So, I mean, if you look at this here, you immediately will recognize that perhaps there is a cow behind a tree there. But to do that, we have to, first of all, we have to identify that those two separate visual images or parts of an image there are all part of the same object, and that they are being partially occluded by another object there, the tree, which also will tell us that the tree must be in front of, closer to us than the cow. Otherwise, it wouldn't occlude it there. So there's a whole series of problems that we're actually, without even thinking about, we are solving. Okay. And that's what we're doing all of the time. So every time we look at an image, our historical or our ancestral past will be looking, is there a problem there that we need to solve in terms of perhaps predator avoidance? Okay, now I'll talk briefly about two things here. Adaptation and exaptation, and it's relevant to what we're trying to use our perception for in terms of testing. So adaptation is where we will take a feature and it will become adapted so it's better suited to the purpose. And that's what will happen is, say, if we move to colder climates, for example, or we get another ice age, then we perhaps would grow thicker hair or fur. Okay, so there it would simply adapt. Exaptation is where we take a feature and we adapt it, or it acquires a function for which it was never originally developed. So here, for example, an example would be feathers. So feathers almost certainly were originally for insulation on some of the early warm-blooded creatures. But they've now been taken for an entirely different purpose, which is to aid flight with birds there. And if we think about ourselves, trying to spot a defect, an unexpected object there, or trying to spot some contraband going into an airport, that's not something that we normally have been doing in our ancestral past. But what we have been doing is perhaps trying to spot a predator and then avoid that predator. So what we're using there in terms of defect spotting there has been brought in and exapted from a very different purpose there. And once you start using things for different purposes, that's when you start to get unexpected problems, which is what we see. Okay, so I'll go through some aspects of perception now. I'll look at some experiments by some people called Mack and Rock. The warning here is now we will start to see some flashing images. So I'll go into the simulation. So Mack and Rock, essentially they were interested in what would happen if you suddenly presented somebody with an unexpected stimulus, unexpected object. Of course, they can't tell people that because it's given the game away, a bit like the gorilla for you guys here. So what they told people was, we're going to measure length. Okay, so we'll get you to measure the lengths of some objects there. And so they gave them some instructions. They were going to put a crosshair on the screen, look at the crosshair. After a few seconds, we will put up a large cross. The cross won't be equal, horizontal and vertical. Which lines are longer? Okay, so people are thinking this is the task. So they go through and it's something like this. Yeah, so they'd ask, which is longer, horizontal or vertical? So they'll do this a few times, get people settled down. Yeah. And then they will throw an unexpected event on the screen, such as you saw there. Now, did anybody see anything unexpected on the screen? Yeah, pretty well everyone did. This has been deliberately slowed down, so the image is up there for longer and it's a larger image. It was a much more fleeting image in the experiment there. So it was just very briefly on the screen for people. Okay, and then they asked people, did you see anything else? And of course, there's also the possibility that even though people did not consciously see it, they may have subconsciously registered it there. So they asked, have a guess. If there was anything there, what would you guess its shape was? What quadrant was it in? Just have a guess, okay? And then they repeated this again. Of course, by now, people are suspecting something's up, okay? So they would sort of calm them down a bit, and then they will throw up that unexpected object again. And then they'll go through that second event there. Okay, they'll ask them, did you see anything? If you didn't, have a guess what it looked like, where it was. And so here's the results that they found. So 25% of us would fail to spot the unexpected stimulus. And remember, it was up there much quicker than that for these people. They'd also be unable to pick it out from an array of alternatives, which suggests that either it never entered their subconscious or it was not available to be retrieved from their subconscious. And that was true even if it was a brightly coloured object or the object was moving. Now, they were also interested in visual as well, and our optics in our eyes are not really that great. So what they also wanted to do was work out, well, perhaps if we put the unexpected stimulus in the best part of watching it, perhaps we would see it there. So they move things around like this. But what they actually found very unexpectedly was moving the unexpected object to the best part of your optics there, right in the centre, a place called the fovea, actually reduced the chance of seeing it. They also thought, well, what if we remove the attentional demanding task there? So we'll put the stimulus there after we've removed the cross. And actually, people still failed to see the unexpected stimulus there. So largely the results that they came out of this, and this is very relevant to test execution, we are less likely to spot an event if we are engaged in an intentionally demanding task. And that's what test execution is. Generally, we are pretty busy then. Even if that task has ended, and even if the event is highly salient and is close to the intended task, we will still fail to spot it. Okay, so I'll carry on. So that was the simulation of Mack and Rock. Now we'll look at a bit more work by some other people called Resink and Clark. And what they did, again, there's some warnings of flashing images here. So what they were interested in was what happens if you briefly interrupt people's perception. how does that affect their ability to notice these things? So they had a couple of images, and what we'll see here is, well, I'll have two images. They're identical apart from a small difference, but what I've put is I put a blank slide in between. So if we look at that. So can you spot the difference? Yeah, we can gradually spot the difference, but it's not easy, is it? Okay, now there is a blank slide of about 100 milliseconds in between here, so it's a very brief interruption. So even a very brief interruption is sufficient to make it difficult to spot. Okay, so I'll just come out of here. And we look at this second simulation. There is no interruption now. Yeah, that's much easier to see, isn't it? So you can see how even a brief interruption significantly affects our ability to perceive differences. Okay, so the implications for this, the first implication is really good. Okay, good news here. Go and tell your boss, I want a dual screen PC or a multi-screen. If you've got 2 screens, ask for 3 screens or 4 screens. They are an absolute bargain compared with if you have to flip between windows. Even a brief flip between windows is sufficient that it will be sufficient distraction that it will break your interrupt your perception there. So just go for multi-screens there. That's the first thing. The second implication is, well, perhaps we can help things for people that are in very attentionally demanding tasks, that perhaps like pilots, or perhaps if we're driving there, who have to refer occasionally to some other information, but need to keep their eye on the road or the sky there. What about if we made a head-up display, or we did something like that so that people didn't have to look down? So you can see a modern cockpit is full of instrumentation there. And you can see the pilots will be distracted when they look down at the instrumentation. When they're looking at instrumentation, they're not looking at the sky. So there was some work done by a guy called Haynes, and what he did was they did it in a flight simulator, and they mocked up a head-up display so that they would display onto the windows of the simulation some flight information there about airspeed and height and so on, so that the pilots didn't have to look down. And what they found was this did lead to a measurable, a significant improvement in the performance of the pilots. So we think, oh, well, this is great. Let's go for head-up displays. But then they threw in a curved ball. They threw in an unexpected event. And remember, unexpected events. So what they did was they put in what was called a runway incursion. So they were doing simulated takeoffs and landings. So a runway incursion is where there is an incursion, typically either another aircraft or a vehicle which is on the runway where you're about to land. Very rare event, and it's a very rare event because it's an extremely dangerous event, so there's a lot of controls to try and avoid that. What they found was that when they put this head-up display information onto the screen there was a significant delay for all of the pilots before they spotted the runway incursion. So if you do things like this with the vision, you will significantly reduce your probability of seeing unexpected events. Some pilots actually landed the aircraft without actually realizing that there was a runway incursion there. Okay, so I'll go through some other things, and I'll go through them fairly quickly because they're not going to be of surprise to you. So perceptual load. If you have an increase in the perceptual load on you, that will reduce your ability to spot unexpected events. Okay, so no surprises there. Some other external factors. So wakefulness. Okay, if you are tired or fatigued, you are less likely to see unexpected events. So that's not a surprise, but think of what happens when we are overdue on projects. We are working all hours there and we are tired, and then we miss all these defects. So wakefulness, ego depletion, it's similar, but basically it's when you are your body is reduced. Perhaps you've got low sugar levels, or perhaps your motivation is reduced in some way. Perhaps your boss has hacked you off there. Again, if you've got ego depletion, you are less likely to see events. Practice. if you practice, you are more likely to catch unexpected events, which is one reason why you will have trials at airports there, where occasionally someone will come through with a replica gun, trying to catch the people out there, to keep them on their toes. Practice does help. Okay, now we're coming on to the most important part. So what I really want to explain to you at the end of this is why we fail to spot the gorilla. And this is where we get this information of why we don't spot that gorilla. So it was done by some people, Most et al. Included in there is one of the researchers that did that original gorilla thing there. So what happened from here is they've moved on a bit, these researchers, and so instead of looking at unexpected objects in terms of gorillas, they were looking at simple objects on a computer screen. I don't know if they'd run out of budget and they couldn't afford the gorilla suits anymore, but there was some reason they did that. So it was either simple objects like squares, triangles, circles, black or white or grey on a grey background. And they would move them around like this. They would give people an attentionally demanding task, like count up the number of times squares bounce off the side of the screen. And then they would introduce an unexpected event. So it went something like this. Be going around like this, and then suddenly an unexpected event would come in, like that, which you can see there. Okay, so how did this work out then? Right, so if we look over on the left-hand side, I'm not sure. Yeah, you can. I'm not sure that my point. Oh, it does work. Wow. Okay, if you look over on the left-hand side here, what you would see is that it depends on what you are trying to look at. So if you were looking for a white object, if the unexpected event was a black object, you would almost certainly not see it. However, if it was a white object, almost certainly you would see it. Now, and if it was a grey object and it was somewhere in between, then your chances would gradually decrease. Now, at this stage, you may think, well, that's not a surprise, really. That is, you're not telling me anything new. Have a second look at this. This is a really, truly astonishing result, but you have to look at it very carefully. So if we look at it here, okay? So imagine that you have been given the attendant's task of counting the white objects. If we look on there, the black object is highly visible, it's highly salient, but we miss it. We find it far easier to see an unexpected event of the grey objects, but those grey objects are not more salient, they are more difficult to see. So we fail to spot an object, not because of its lack of saliency, its visibility, but we fail to spot an object because it is not close to the attentional set of the items we are looking for. And that's got a tremendous impact and relevance to testing there. It's also got relevance actually to more mundane things. So in our country, and I imagine in most other countries of people here, there is a problem with cyclists getting injured and killed by colliding with cars. The most common comment that is afterwards that is made by the motorist is, they came from nowhere. I didn't see them. I just simply didn't see them. They were nowhere there. Okay, and we can see here that perhaps the cyclist there is difficult to see. Yeah. So a number of road safety campaigns and bodies there have said, let's make the cyclists more salient. So we'll give them high-vis jackets. Yeah. But if we think, what is the attentional set of the motorist? Now, the motorist is probably worried about things that look like this: vans, cars, large metal objects that have got four wheels and take up a lot of space. Yeah? Those are the things that are going to injure or kill the motorist or damage their car. So those are the things that they're going to be worried about. That's where their attention is. Okay? The cyclist looks very different. So it's outside of the attentional set of a lot of motorists, particularly when their attentional load is high, their perceptual load is high. Lots of things are happening on the highway at the time. So they failed to see that cyclist because it doesn't look like the van. But if we put a high-vis jacket on, they look even less like the van. So there's no guarantee that if you are wearing high visibility clothing, that you are more likely to be seen. Because that's what your attentional set looks like there. So the ordinary cyclist is just outside that, the high vis cyclist is a long way out. Now, things aren't quite as simple as this, because you can raise awareness of things. So if you do safety campaigns, awareness campaigns, you can pull this in there. Or you can make the consequences of hitting a cyclist more severe. And there's some countries there, for example, the Netherlands, that have gone down this route there, where perhaps the onus of blame is automatically on the motorist there. So motorists are far more aware of a cyclist in the Netherlands because they don't want to get blamed for hitting a cyclist. Okay, now we can go back to that the invisible gorilla, and now we can look at it and we can understand it. Before, we could look at it, we didn't have that same understanding. We can understand why it is invisible. If we think, what is the attentionally demanding task that we are doing now? We think about that. Yeah. It's counting up those basketball passes. So we've got something that we're doing. It's attentionally demanding. Okay, what is the attentional set here? What is it we're paying attention to? And so we were counting up passes between the white-shirted team. Yeah, so our attentional set is white-shirted players. Okay. I'll introduce something for the first time. What's the irrelevant set? It's got no relevance to what we are paying attention to. Black, yep. So it's the black-shirted team. So they have no relevance. So actually, we are trying to filter them out. We're trying to screen those people out. Yeah. And what is the salient object? The unexpected event. It's the gorilla. Yeah. Okay. And if we look at that there, we failed to spot the gorilla. Yeah. But we failed to spot the gorilla not because it is not salient, it's not visible, it's highly salient there, highly visible. The reason that we do not see that gorilla is because it is very different from the attentional set that we are looking at. We're looking at the white-shirted team there. Yeah. So now we can start to understand, how could we see that gorilla? Okay, so what if there was no attentional task? If we're not counting basketball passes, everybody sees the gorilla then. There's no problem then. So there has to be an attentionally demanding task. What if the attentional set was the black-clothed athletes? Are we more likely, would we see the gorilla then? Yeah, far more likely, because the salient object is close to the attentional set. So we are far more likely to see it there. What if the salient event was a polar bear? So a white polar bear instead of a black gorilla. Yeah, yeah. So it was white, and we are looking at white-shirted teams. Yeah, we would see it. Yeah. So this is why this is the invisible gorilla and not the invisible polar bear. Okay, there's a little bit more here. If you show this video to professional basketball players, far more of them see the gorilla than we do. Okay, ordinary people. The reason for that is that they are used to watching basketballs being passed between people at high speed, also frequently with deceptive moves there, deception. Okay, so when they're passing that basketball there between those college people there, they were not under the same perceptual load that we were. So they had a lot of spare capacity for spotting the gorilla. So that's something else to also think about when you've got, if you bring in SMEs that have got a lot of experience, they are more likely to have some spare perceptual capacity to spot things like this. So the experts are still valuable. Okay, so I'll speak a bit about the visual process. Okay, even though really we're talking about perception, I've used vision here most of the time because it's really quick to talk about and it's easy to get the ideas across, but it's really perception. Most of us think of visual process as it more or less finishes when it hits the retina there. Maybe it just gets projected in our brains there. That's a bit of a misnomer. So we think optics, retina, into the mind, and then we do a bit of action. But actually, most of the work is happening once it gets into our mind. Once it gets into our mind, it then splits out, and the signals go all over our brain. And we've got about 30 different areas in our brain that are associated with vision. That's far more than any other animal. The next closest animal is about 12 there, and I think it's the chimpanzees. Most animals make do with about 6 or so. And we can see colour, motion, classification. We are very good at face recognition. Yeah. And also, we can identify a mood of another one of our species simply by their face there. Yeah. And we've also got that so what thing. How do we identify things? So there's a tiger coming towards us, so what? And then we know how to react there. So lots and lots of parts there. Another thing that we've also got is we've got some feed forward and feedback process, and I'll talk about that in a second. Now, has anybody seen this image before? No. Okay, does anybody recognize there's an object inside here? Yeah, okay, there's something inside here. It's very difficult to see, yeah? But what will happen is if you look at this for long enough, eventually you will see it. And this is an important thing. If you keep looking, you will see it. Okay? Now, I'll give you a bit of a clue. It's over here. We'll look at it for a minute or two. Okay? Now, I'll zoom forwards. I'll come back to it. What we've also got in our minds is we've got these various different functional areas. And we've got feedback. We've got feed forward. But also what we've got is feedback loops as well. And in some areas, the feedback circuits are larger than the feed forward. So what we're probably doing, the hypothesis is, what we're doing in situations like this is, we're making a guess. We see something there, or we look at that, we can't identify what it is, we make a guess at it, we then take that guess and we feed it back into our, again, and we go through that again and again. A bit like if you've done, is it matrix maths, and you'll do eigenvectors, and it gradually would come to a conclusion there, okay? Now, do you want me to tell you what this is? Do I? Yep, okay, yep. So it's a Dalmatian dog, okay? And here is the head, there is the ear, there's the collar. Here is one leg down here, one leg down here. There's the belly of the dog. There'll be a leg there, there's a leg over there, and you can see a tail there, and then its spine will be there. Now you see it, yeah? If you had looked at that long enough, you would have seen that. And you would have seen it because of that feedback there, gradually improving your guess at that image. So we can work with very little information, okay? So if we look here, for example, we just have that, okay? But I only need to put a few more cues on there, and then you start to see something. This is what cartoons are, after all. Okay, so if I start putting a bit of information on there, okay, and perhaps some more there. Does anyone hazard a guess at what it might be? Yes. Yep. Yep. Koala bear, or a bear climbing a tree or a telegraph pole. Yeah. Yep. So we just need to put the tiniest bit of information there, and we can get a clue. But this information in these objects have to be in a certain order there. So here, for example, you see nothing at all, yeah? But if we start moving these things around, then you'll start, at some stage, there'll come a critical point when you'll start to see something. Yeah? Okay. So that was all it required. And then we can actually then start doing quite smart things. We can actually get it to look in one direction or the other simply by moving that there. Yeah? Okay. So if you are interested in the neuroscience side of things here, this is a really good book here, The Telltale Brain. Okay? It's done by a neuroscientist. He's got some interesting experiments in there, and some of them are very simple. So you can do some of these experiments yourself. However, he is a neuroscientist, so don't do all of the experiments. Okay, so what I've talked about, what I'm really wanting to talk about, my interest is in attentional. But so far we've looked at visual. And we've looked at visual because it's so quick, but really it's attentional. So if you think it's not just failing to spot things, that are visual, it's also failing to identify things in a conceptual way. So we can, if we're writing a document, we can get very, very focused on the attention to the detail or the meaning of something, and then we will forget the layout, or vice versa. And this is this same perception there. Okay, so the question is actually, can we do anything to mitigate against this? And there are some things that we can do. Now, mostly things are a trade-off. Okay, so it's a trade-off between all-round vision for predator avoidance, always focusing there so that you can catch and subdue prey. So it's mostly a trade-off, but you can choose what that trade-off is. If you want to catch unexpected objects, then you're not going to be able to do that if at the same time you are focusing down on some details there. Mostly a trade-off, except for one thing: get your boss to buy those additional screens. So one thing is pair testing, for example. If a test is very demanding and there may be something occurring through it there, a second tester who is pair tested, who is one focused on the test, one focused on looking for any unexpected events that are not expected there, this can work. However, there's a bit of caution here. And the difficulty with the caution is that here, the second tester has to be focused, or has to be looking for unexpected events. If they're both focused on the test, or more commonly, if the second one is focused on their phone, or conversing, having a conversation with the first one there, it doesn't work. Second one is automated replay. If it's really important and there's a one-off chance of catching this, then it's worthwhile capturing it in a replay situation. This is why one reason why security cameras, security videos are so useful. Okay. Another thing is task division, task compartmentalization there. So compartmentalize tasks there. Or task aids checklist there. So you can you'll reduce the mental load on people, and hopefully if you can also reduce that perceptual load, then they've got more capacity, like the professional basketball stars. We can reduce the distraction, so it can be on with the headphones. Just don't play any music in them. Okay. Or you can also, perhaps this is the other takeaway here, go to your boss and say, we want 3 vending machines that are full of coffee, and we want some donuts in the afternoon. Okay, so thank you. I've come to an end now. If we have any questions, if we pop them on the Slido, thank you very much.